This is the brief lecture for European history for Tuesday, December 7th, 2021, the 80th anniversary of the Imperial Japanese sneak attack on the U.S. military bases at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Hopefully some of you had a chance to go to today's ceremony in remembrance of that. What we have just done with most of our class is seen an extended set of excerpts from the 1977 TV miniseries Roots, which traced the capture of an African by a white slaver and a bunch of black slavers, his middle passage, and his auction. Now, the auction and the bill of sale and the handbill are historical documents. Alex Haley was the author of this, was using as many documents as a good historian will to justify his story of his family's history. His book, Roots, and the miniseries is based on oral tradition, the stories told by his family generation by generation. But he did supplement. So there was actually a bill of sale to John Reynolds of Virginia for an African slave fresh off the boat. And there were records of that event. So, what do we get? Well, first of all, there are two types of ships that you can detect over the horizon in the age of sail. One is whaling vessels. Whaling vessels hunt sperm whales, and they, when they kill one, they bring it up alongside of the ship, and they slice the layers of whale blubber off the surface of the carcass. And that whale blubber is then boiled in a giant pot or set of pots on the deck, and the stench of whale blubber being rendered down into liquid oil form is just so horrible. There's also the stench of the ambergris, which is a substance that comes from a sperm whale's head, which is also deeply, deeply strong. So you could smell a whaler going about its business, a whaling vessel, over the horizon. The stench would carry for tens of miles. Slave ships were the same. Slave ships, regardless of how you pack, are filled with human beings who are being kept in filthy conditions. I mean, filth beyond any ability to convey. So you could be 30 miles away from a slave ship, and if the wind is right, you could smell them. So what you saw was actually nice because we don't have smell-o-vision. That's a good one. I can understand wanting perfect picture, high definition, super speakers and all that, but you would not want smell-o-vision. Not if you have any sense about you. Think about it. Would not be pleasant. So that's the Middle Passage. Finished goods come from Europe to the Guinea coast of Africa. They're traded to the slave traders who then exchange the goods for slaves. And the Middle Passage goes to Jamaica, about here, and Haiti and Santo Domingo, and Puerto Rico and Barbados and the other islands of the Antilles. Because sugar, and Cuba, sugar is grown on these islands. And in the 1700s, sugar was the great crop. It wasn't cotton, it wasn't oil, sugar. Europeans had just discovered cane sugar. And instead of using things like sweet potatoes or beets, sugar beets to make something sweet, or honey, Europeans now have access to genuine cane sugar. And that's good. Europeans develop a taste for it. So the truth is that during the time of the American Revolution, the island of Jamaica was more important to the British Empire than the entire east coast of British North America, because Jamaica, with its sugar production, produced much more value than all of the 13 colonies that will end up becoming the early United States. And that's amazing. That just shows you how important sugar is. In North America and the Caribbean islands, slaves are traded for raw materials: molasses, sugar, cotton, tobacco, timber. And these raw materials are shipped back to Europe. So if we're an English merchantman on the triangle trade, we make a bit of profit selling our finished goods for slaves. We make a bit of profit, not much, selling our slaves for raw materials. A bit of profit going back to Britain. And we just keep doing this. And if you keep doing this, unless there's something freakishly bad with the market, or there's a war that will end up having you get attacked by privateers, which are officially sanctioned pirates of the enemy, I was about to say it's a decent living. Everything moral in me cries out, there's nothing decent about it. But remember, the ideas of the time say that slavery is normal and usual. And just like some people don't like the fact that there's trade in guns today, or alcohol today, or drugs today, there were some people that never liked slavery. They had scruples about it, but they were by far the minority. And they were in economies that depended upon slaves. So this is the triangle trade. Any questions, comments, or thoughts about it? This should matter, because if there is one thing that characterizes the Americas, from Tierra del Fuego in southern Chile and Argentina to Point Barrow, Alaska, the entire Americas, north and south, and the offshore islands have a characteristic tripartite population. You have a mixture of natives, blacks, and whites. A mixture of Native Americans, African Americans, and European Americans. And by this, I don't mean Americans as in citizens of the United States. I mean people of the Americas. Every country. Now, Brazil has large numbers of blacks and Indians, fairly small numbers of whites, of Europeans. Mexicans are very proud of being mixed blood, mainly mestizo, which is a mixture of European and Indian. But there are some blacks that went to Mexico as well. So while the more pure-blood European Mexicans tend to be the upper class, and while the pure-blood Indians tend to be on the fringes of Mexican society, and yes, Mexico has border problems with Guatemala and Honduras to their south, and Mexico has been dealing with low-grade Indian insurrections for the last 50 years. Southern Mexico is an area where Spanish is a foreign language to a lot of the natives, because they speak their Indian languages. And because of the rough terrain and jungle, it's been very hard for Mexican society to penetrate there, which is something I always remember when the Mexicans talk about how America should be more open to immigration, legal and illegal. They're not. You know who enforces border policy in Mexico on its southern border? Ejército de México, the Mexican army. And they're not gentle. They're very hardcore. So the importation of African slaves is something that really does make a permanent mark on all American countries. Now, in Chile and Argentina and the United States and Canada, there's a fairly large proportion of Europeans, descendants, a fairly small proportion of surviving Indians and blacks. In everywhere from Mexico to Brazil and Peru, the proportions are different. You tend to have smaller Europeanized populations, larger black or Indian populations, depending upon where you're talking. And this is something that affects. It also should matter to you because, as most of you are citizens of the United States, this legacy of importing black slaves from Africa is still with us. Now, I'm frankly proud of our record. We start out as a slave-owning, slave-holding society. We start our republic with only European men of property being able to vote. But within the first 80 years of the republic, all European descendants who are men can vote. We eliminate the property distinction. During the Civil War, Lincoln started out wanting to send the slaves back to Africa. The African nation of Liberia, which is right about here, its capital is Monrovia, named after President James Monroe. It was established by American abolitionists to send blacks back to Africa. The abolitionists would buy slaves and send them back. Well, what the former slaves did in Liberia, the nation of liberty, is they treated the natives that were there like second-class citizens. And for most of its history, Liberia has had an upper class of Americanized former slaves who are black, ruling over natives who never went to the United States. That's ironic. We fight our bloodiest war over it, but because black soldiers fight on the side of the Union, and they take ridiculous casualties, Lincoln changes his mind. And instead of having a policy of repatriation back to Africa, Lincoln decides to emancipate the slaves and make them into American citizens. So those people who were slaves, their descendants are Americans as of the middle 1860s. This is contemporaneous with the Russian Tsar Alexander II freeing the serfs. In Russia, the vast majority of people were serfs. They were peasants under the Tsar, in effect, partial slaves. Alexander II freed them at about the time Lincoln freed the slaves. Both of them received the same reward. Alexander II was assassinated by a bunch of anarchists, including Vladimir Lenin's older brother. Lincoln was assassinated by a Southern sympathizer named John Wilkes Booth. Thank you. Tomorrow we go into the background of the American Revolution and how it connects to the French. Bye-bye.